Hey guys, tonight we step back into the misty beginning of what would become the United States. You're not yet American. You're not even a colonist. You're just a sea-worn traveler, boots still damp from the salt spray, staring at an unfamiliar coastline with a mix of awe, dread, and possibly scurvy. The air is sharp and smells of pine sap and brine. The trees are thicker than you've ever seen, tangled like thoughts that never get spoken aloud. The wind hums through bare branches. Somewhere deeper in the woods, something howls. Or maybe it's just the wind messing with your ears. Either way, your musket suddenly feels very, very small. You're here because someone back home, maybe a king, maybe a merchant, maybe a cousin with a gambling problem, said this place held promise. Gold, land, salvation, a fresh start. But no one mentioned the bugs, or the hunger, or how badly your shoes would fit after 2 months at sea. The year is somewhere in the early 1600s. Jamestown, Plymouth, New Amsterdam, places whose names will become legends, are for now just muddy clearings with a few thatched roofs and a lot of arguing. You sleep in shifts, worried that the cold might kill you if the food doesn't run out first. At night, stories pass around the fires about native tribes nearby, both generous and fearsome. About diseases that leave bodies in clumps, about mysterious lights in the trees and the sound of drums that beat long after midnight. It's not all fear, though. One morning, you see something incredible. A native woman, perhaps named Pocahontas, though no one spells it the same way twice, walking calmly into the heart of your rough settlement. She doesn't flinch. She brings food. You wonder what she thinks of all of you. The settlers are a patchwork. English, Dutch, French, Spanish, each bringing their own accents, gods, diseases, and hats. You quickly learn that the New World is less about discovery and more about survival, with alliances, skirmishes, and misunderstandings blooming like mold in the corners of this makeshift civilization. You learn to plant corn with fish guts. You trade trinkets for pelts. You listen when an indigenous elder explains the seasons better than any European almanac. You start to realize the land isn't empty. It's ancient and already full of stories, if you're willing to listen. You wouldn't survive long here without help. That's your first reality check. You're not a pioneer, you're mostly a liability, but you're learning. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere around the world, let me know in the comments where you are and what time it is. I'm always curious who's drifting off when. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. A winter passes. A ship arrives late with fresh supplies and a preacher who won't stop talking about damnation. You pretend to care. The truth is, you're starting to love this strange, brutal place. There's something clean about the cold, something honest in the hunger. When spring returns, you build stronger shelters, dig deeper wells, bury your dead with names carved into rough bark. The colonies are beginning, but they're not what you think. They're not sturdy or inevitable. They're accidents of weather, of stubbornness, of sheer dumb luck. The Mayflower nearly missed Massachusetts. Jamestown nearly collapsed. Roanoke did collapse. Vanished, actually, with only the word Croatoan left behind, like a whisper on a tree. Historians still argue about what happened there. Were they killed? Did they join local tribes? Or just move inland and disappear? And then there are the quirks. One colony bans Christmas. Another insists on building a fence around their church, just in case bears get ideas. A preacher insists that the moon is hollow and filled with fire. Someone else brews a beer from pumpkin guts and swears it'll be the drink of the future. They weren't wrong. You sleep in a loft above your tools, listening to the roof creak in the wind. Your hands are calloused. You know how to gut a fish, sharpen a blade, patch a leak. You no longer dream of returning home, because this is your home now. And as dawn breaks, red across the endless trees, you sense the first faint rhythm of something new. A murmur beneath the soil. Not yet a country, not even a dream. But perhaps a question. You wake to the sound of hammering. Not war drums, not yet. But the kind of hammering that means someone's building something bigger than a hut. A town hall, maybe, or a meeting house. Something with a bell, a gable roof, and a determination to last. Because now, the colonies are multiplying, stretching like vines along the coast. 13 soon enough, though no one's counting yet. You start hearing words like charter and governance. You try to ignore them while digging irrigation ditches, but they seep into your dreams anyway. It turns out that when you drop a bunch of Europeans with strong opinions onto a patch of contested wilderness, things get lively. You're in Massachusetts, maybe, where the Puritans keep the Sabbath with such ferocity that even smiling feels sinful. You watch as a woman, Anne Hutchinson, challenges their theology and is banished for the crime of thinking too independently. Or maybe you're in Maryland, where Catholics try to build a tolerant haven and learn that tolerance is harder than it sounds. In New Amsterdam, meanwhile, the Dutch are busy trading furs, smoking pipes, and naming things after themselves. Harlem, Brooklyn, the Bowery. A man named Peter Stuyvesant insists on wooden sidewalks and good beer. You admire the wooden leg he stomps around on. He got it fighting the Spanish, or so he claims. Then the English come and rename the place New York after the Duke. You blink, not much changes, except the flags and the accents. You notice a strange pattern. Every colony acts like it's the center of the universe. They write their own laws, issue their own currency, argue about fences. Virginia grows rich on tobacco and enslaved labor. Pennsylvania welcomes everyone. Quakers, Mennonites, mystics with too many cats. Georgia is a debtor's experiment. The Carolinas just want their rice fields to grow. And all the while, you sense something beneath the politics. A low hum of defiance. These people are used to bad weather, bad harvests, and worse governors. They complain about taxes, tariffs, and redcoats who don't tip. There's a fringe detail you can't stop thinking about. In Rhode Island, someone decides to outlaw witch trials before they happen, just in case. Maybe they've heard of Salem. Maybe they just don't trust mobs. Either way, it's oddly forward-thinking. Then you hear about Benjamin Franklin. You don't meet him, of course. He's busy inventing bifocals, running a printing press, and writing aphorisms like, "Fish and visitors smell in 3 days." He's the kind of man who makes you believe in something new, something possible. He flies a kite in a thunderstorm just to see what lightning feels like. You imagine he probably wouldn't survive long in a Puritan village. Life isn't easy. You still lose children to fever. You still barter more than you buy. But you also host barn dances, laugh over roasted corn, and marvel at the mail arriving faster than expected. Roads are slowly being carved between towns, rutted, muddy, full of potholes, but still, they connect. You're beginning to feel something stir. The colonies, these 13 stubborn children, are growing bolder. They trade letters, ideas, and warnings. There's talk of a shared identity, though no one agrees on what that means. And the British? They're over there, across the ocean, assuming you're grateful. They tax your paper, your sugar, your tea. You try to grumble politely, but the grumbling soon grows teeth. Historians still debate when the colonies started to think of themselves as American. Was it when they started printing their own newspapers? When they ignored British governors in favor of local assemblies? Or when someone realized they hadn't seen a proper redcoat in weeks and didn't miss them? You spend your days building, planting, writing letters in messy ink. You've lived through harsh winters, spiritual awakenings, and cultural collisions. You've watched towns bloom like wildflowers and sometimes burn to the ground. One night, you sit beneath a tree, watching the stars, and overhear a conversation between two men. One of them mutters something about liberty. The other, bolder, calls it a birthright. You don't know it yet, but that word will echo louder and louder until it breaks glass, and you'll be there when it does. You smell it before you hear it. Salt, tar, and tension. The docks are crowded. Men unload crates marked with a crown seal, but fewer hands reach to help. Something's changed. The mood has thickened like stew left too long on the fire. You walk past a newspaper stand. The headlines are angry now. Words like oppression, tyranny, representation, printed in bold, black ink, smudged by the rain, but not forgotten. The Stamp Act is being protested. People are burning papers in the streets. Tax on tea. You'd laugh if it weren't so real. You enter a tavern and see candlelight flickering over whispered conversations. No one says revolution aloud, not yet. That's still treason. But they say things like, Boston is ready, and the Sons of Liberty are planning something. You sip your cider and pretend not to listen. But your heart quickens. Samuel Adams, you hear, is stirring the pot with words sharper than a bayonet. Paul Revere's name comes up, though right now he's just a silversmith who rides fast and knows who to talk to. Across the colonies, committees of correspondence are sending secret letters. You think of them as social media for patriots, with wax seals and code names instead of hashtags. Then it happens. A shipment of tea arrives in Boston Harbor. The British insist on taxes. The colonists insist on principles. The result? You watch in the moonlight as men dressed as Mohawk warriors dump chests of tea into the black water, one after another. They work quickly, deliberately. No looting, just tea swallowed by the sea. It's a moment of symbolism so strong, you don't yet realize you'll one day read about it in school books. Parliament responds with the coercive acts. You call them the intolerable acts. Boston is punished. The harbor is closed. Redcoats march in boots too polished for these muddy streets. And then, Philadelphia. You ride in on a wagon with creaking wheels to witness something improbable. Delegates from every colony gathering under one roof. The First Continental Congress. You see John Adams pacing, George Washington listening more than he speaks, Patrick Henry declaring, "Give me liberty or give me death." It gives you chills. You wonder if he practiced that in front of a mirror. But here's a quirky detail. They still drink together after sessions. Ale, cider, even Madeira wine shipped at absurd cost. They argue fiercely by day and toast by firelight at night. A reminder, even revolutionaries like a good drink. Then the gunshots. April 1775, Lexington and Concord. You weren't there, but you hear the tale. The shot heard round the world. No one knows who fired first. A farmer? A British soldier startled by a squirrel? Historians still debate it. But what matters is that it happened. There's no going back now. You grab a musket. You march. You're suddenly a soldier in a war that didn't exist last week. You don't have a uniform, but you have conviction. Sort of. The war spreads like wildfire. George Washington becomes commander-in-chief. You meet him briefly, a tall man with solemn eyes and a patience that unnerves you. He's no natural genius, but he's steady. And steady, it turns out, is exactly what revolutions need. You fight, you lose, you run, you regroup. It's not glamorous. It's muddy boots, spoiled food, letters home that never arrive. But then, Trenton. You cross the icy Delaware on Christmas night and ambush sleeping Hessians. Victory, finally. You feel hope bloom in the frost. France enters the war. Thank Lafayette for that. He's young, French, fabulously wealthy, and wildly in love with the idea of liberty. His accent is charming. His cavalry is better. You're at Yorktown when it ends. Cannons thunder. Cornwallis surrenders. You hear a band play "The World Turned Upside Down." It feels appropriate. And suddenly, it's over. Independence. A word you'd barely dared whisper is now carved into parchment. You read the Declaration of Independence and feel something stir in your chest. All men are created equal, it says. You look around and wonder, really? All? But that's a question for another day. For now, you're just glad it's quiet. The drums have fallen silent. But peace doesn't come with fanfare. It comes with confusion. You walk through the smoke of old battlefields into a nation still learning how to breathe. The war was one thing. Messy, noisy, passionate. But governance? That's quieter and trickier. The Articles of Confederation are the first attempt. You sit in a hall while men argue over how strong a central government should be. Spoiler? Not very. Under the Articles, states act like squabbling siblings who borrow sugar and never return it. They print their own money, set their own tariffs, and refuse to fund a national army. It's a miracle anything gets done. You see towns trying to rebuild. Farmers plant again, blacksmiths hammer again, and taverns refill with laughter. But the unity forged in war starts to fray. You overhear debates about whether Pennsylvania should trade freely with New York, or whether Massachusetts should help pay Virginia's war debts. It's not clear yet if the United States will stay united at all. Then comes a peculiar moment. A group of farmers in western Massachusetts, led by Daniel Shays, pick up arms not against the British, but against their own government. They're drowning in debt and taxes, and no one in Boston seems to care. Shays' rebellion rattles everyone. If this is what freedom looks like, maybe it's time to rethink the blueprint. So they gather again. 1787, Philadelphia. You arrive in the sweltering heat, where the windows are nailed shut for secrecy, and the air smells like ink, sweat, and compromise. This is the Constitutional Convention. George Washington presides, silent and grave. James Madison takes furious notes. Benjamin Franklin is old now, carried in on a sedan chair, but still sharp as flint. They argue about everything: representation, slavery, trade, whether a president should serve for life or not at all. It's a miracle they don't come to blows. Here's a quirky image. To settle one dispute, a compromise creates two chambers of Congress: the Senate, where every state gets 2 votes, and the House, where it's based on population. Big states and small states grudgingly agree. You picture them all sighing into their waistcoats. Eventually, they write a document. Not perfect, but functional. The Constitution. It starts with "We the people," and even if it doesn't mean everyone just yet, it means something. You sign your name and hope for the best. In 1789, George Washington becomes the first president. You watch his inauguration from a crowded street in New York City, where the new government begins its life. He's stiff, formal, nervous. You respect him more for that. You see the first political parties forming. Federalists like Alexander Hamilton, who want a strong central government, and Democratic Republicans like Thomas Jefferson, who want more power for the states. They argue in print and in private, calling each other names that would make modern Twitter blush. Meanwhile, You walk past Hamilton's Treasury Building, where the National Bank is being born. Jefferson calls it unconstitutional. Hamilton calls it necessary. They duel with words until, years later, they actually duel with pistols. But that's another story. You hear talk of the Bill of Rights. 10 amendments that protect things like speech, religion, and trial by jury. Some people think it's obvious. Others think it's revolutionary. You just think it's reassuring. And all around you, the country is stretching. Kentucky becomes a state. Vermont, too. The Mississippi River whispers of new lands, and settlers begin pushing westward, slowly, but relentlessly. There's a scholarly mystery you overhear. Some historians believe the founders expected the Constitution to be revised often. Jefferson, in particular, thought every generation might rewrite it. Instead, it becomes sacred, unchangeable almost. You wonder if that's a good thing. You return to your homestead. You have a mailbox now, a flag. You vote if you're white, male, and own land, anyway. You still milk the cow and fix the roof. But now, you do it in a country that has a name, the United States of America. It sounds strange every time someone says it, but it's growing on you. One night, sitting by the fire, you open a newspaper. You read about a rebellion in France and wonder if they're borrowing your revolution or just imitating the noise. You read about Washington deciding not to run for a third term, that he's voluntarily giving up power. You blink. Monarchs don't do that. But this man does. And because of that, you realize the experiment might just work. For now, you pack a satchel and head west. Not because you're running from something, though plenty are, but because the land is calling. It's the turn of the 19th century, and there's a restlessness in your bones, the kind that builds when a country gets too big for its britches. The road west is barely a road. It's more like a series of ruts and rumors. You pass trappers, missionaries, men selling miracle tonics, and women with eyes sharper than their husbands. They say the Mississippi marks the edge of civilization. You cross it anyway. In 1803, something remarkable happens. The Louisiana Purchase. You don't understand all the details. Napoleon needs money. Jefferson wants elbow room. But suddenly, your country doubles in size with the stroke of a quill. $15 million for land no one fully understands. You picture Thomas Jefferson squinting at the map, thinking, I hope there's something out there. President Jefferson sends 2 men, Lewis and Clark, to find out. You meet them briefly in St. Louis, their expedition stacked high with journals, compasses, and optimism. You give them a jar of pickles and wish them luck. Months later, you hear tales of grizzlies, waterfalls, and a Shoshone woman named Sacagawea who guides them through the mountains with a baby on her back. Meanwhile, you're in Missouri territory now, planting corn in soil that squelches underfoot. You sleep under stars that don't belong to anyone. You build fences to suggest that they do. But westward expansion isn't just romantic. It's thorny. You start seeing signs of displacement. Tribes moved, treaties made and broken, buffalo herds thinning. The land isn't empty. It never was. It's just being rewritten. You pass a wagon train stuck in the mud. You help push, then hear the old joke about how if you spit west of the Mississippi, someone will call it a settlement. You laugh, but it sticks. Then war again. 18 to 12. You hear drums in the distance and see smoke on the horizon. This time, it's with Britain. Again. The reasons are complicated. Trade restrictions, impressment of sailors, national pride. Some call it America's second war for independence. You call it yet another excuse for marching in wet boots. You hear about the British burning Washington, D.C., the White House charred, the Capitol smoldering. Dolly Madison famously saves George Washington's portrait. You wonder if he would have preferred they saved his desk. But the war ends with a handshake and a shrug. No land changes hands. No clear winner. Except maybe Andrew Jackson, whose ragtag army of frontiersmen defeats the British at New Orleans after the treaty was signed. Historians still marvel at that detail. A battle fought after peace because the mail came late. Jackson becomes a hero, then a president. You have mixed feelings. He's rough, proud, decisive, and controversial. You hear about the Trail of Tears. Thousands of Cherokee marched west under his orders. Many don't survive. You want to believe your country is better than that. But it isn't. Not always. Still, you keep moving. You help dig canals like the Erie that link waterways and promise prosperity. You marvel at the steamboat's paddle churn and the sound of commerce floating downriver. Towns pop up like mushrooms. Cincinnati, St. Louis, Chicago. Each one a new bet on tomorrow. A quirky memory. One day, you find a platypus drawing in a newspaper, sent from an explorer in Australia. People argue whether it's a hoax. You look at the fuzzy sketch and wonder what else the world is hiding. Back home, politics get noisier. Federalists fade, Whigs rise, populism brews. You hear debates in every bar and barn about tariffs, about slavery, about what it means to be American. You buy a plot of land for $30 and a promise. You raise a barn with neighbors who speak 3 languages between them. You watch as trains arrive in town, loud, gleaming, unstoppable. You ride one once and feel like time itself is speeding up, but something's brewing. A pressure in the air, like a storm building behind distant hills. You don't know it yet, but the cracks are deepening. You feel it before you see it, like a hairline fracture in old porcelain, too fine to notice until it spreads. The country is growing, yes, but also pulling at its seams, and you're standing right in the middle, hearing arguments that no longer stay civil, no matter how much whiskey is poured. Slavery. The word hangs heavy in every conversation now, whether whispered or shouted. It's not just a Southern institution, it's a national contradiction. You live in a land that wrote, "All men are created equal," but your neighbors own other human beings. In the North, you hear abolitionist speeches so fiery they scorch the air. William Lloyd Garrison prints The Liberator, calling for immediate emancipation. Harriet Beecher Stowe writes Uncle Tom's Cabin, and people say she started a war with a novel. In the South, you hear the word way of life used to mean chains and cotton. Congress tries to patch things over with compromises. The Missouri Compromise. The Compromise of 1850. You lose track of which line on which map is supposed to fix it all. For a while, they work like leaky umbrellas, just enough to delay the storm. Then Kansas bleeds. You visit once. The territory smells like prairie grass and gunpowder. Pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers pour in, each trying to tip the balance. They burn each other's homes. Churches turn into forts. You see a preacher riding with a rifle across his saddle and a Bible in his pocket. Historians still argue whether Kansas was the first battlefield of the Civil War or just a terrible rehearsal. And then, 1859. A man named John Brown seizes a federal armory at Harper's Ferry. You hear about it in the papers. He's wild-eyed, determined, maybe mad. He wants to arm enslaved people and start an uprising. He fails. But when he's executed, the North calls him a martyr. The South calls him a terrorist. You start to think maybe both sides are right. And that's the problem. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln is elected. You see his face on campaign posters, tall hat, gaunt cheeks, worried eyes. He isn't on the ballot in 10 southern states, yet he wins. That tells you everything. South Carolina secedes first, then more follow. You're standing in a general store when someone reads a telegram aloud. 7 states have broken off to form their own country, the Confederate States of America. They write their own constitution, choose Jefferson Davis as president, raise their own flags, and suddenly, war. You don't cheer. There's no music, no firecrackers, just silence, then movement. You join the Union Army out of duty, maybe, or fear, or just because everyone else does. You march in a blue uniform through fields you once planted. You sleep under stars that feel colder now. You carry a rifle that misfires in the rain. The South wears gray, sometimes butternut brown. You can't always tell until it's too late. Bull Run is the first real battle. You expect glory, you get chaos, you run, everyone does. It feels less like a war and more like a tantrum made of gunpowder. You fight at Antietam. The cornfield there turns red. The sun rises on smoke and screaming. More than 20,000 casualties in one day. You help carry wounded men who still whisper the names of their mothers. You never forget those names, and yet, life continues in strange ways. Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. It doesn't free all enslaved people, but it declares a new purpose for the war: freedom. You feel it shift the air, like wind before thunder. You hear music again. Songs like Battle Hymn of the Republic and Dixie blare from opposite sides. Families split. Brothers fight each other. You meet one soldier who hasn't spoken to his cousin in 3 years, but he keeps her letter folded in his boot. Here's something quirky. During the siege of Vicksburg, the townspeople dig caves and live underground for weeks, hiding from shell fire. Some decorate their caverns like parlors. You meet a woman who plays piano underground while artillery rains above. Then Gettysburg. 3 days of horror. You survive somehow, but you stop believing in glory. You hear Lincoln's address months later, 272 words, and marvel at how he says so much with so little. Government of the people, by the people, for the people. The crowd is silent. History shifts. The war drags on. You see black soldiers joining the Union ranks. Brave, disciplined, often treated worse than prisoners. Still, they fight. You see women nursing the wounded, sewing bandages by candlelight, reading last letters aloud to dying men. And then, Appomattox, April 1865. You hear the words, "Lee has surrendered," just like that. The war ends not with an explosion, but with silence. Men shake hands. Some cry. Some can't stop staring at their boots. You head home, weary, scarred, wondering what it was all for. And just as peace settles in, Lincoln is shot. You stand in the crowd outside Ford's Theater. The candlelight flickers across tear-streaked faces. A man in black has taken him. You hear someone say, now he belongs to the ages. And for the first time in years, you can't tell whether the country is healing or breaking in a new way. You return home, but it doesn't feel like home anymore. The fences are there. The trees haven't moved, but everything underneath feels hollowed out. The war has ended, yes, but the silence afterward is thick and uneasy, like a question that no one dares to ask out loud. This is Reconstruction. You walk past towns still half burnt, churches missing their steeples, courthouses with boarded windows. But in the South, something else is happening too. Something quietly monumental. Formerly enslaved men and women step into sunlight with papers declaring them free. They open schools, build churches, run for office. You watch the first black senators take their seats. It feels like history is holding its breath. The Freedmen's Bureau sets up across the South. You visit one and see people learning to write their names for the first time. That image stays with you. The careful, trembling curve of a letter written in hard-won ink. But you also see the backlash. Black codes, vigilante groups, whispers of a new kind of violence with old roots. Freedom, it turns out, is only the beginning of the fight. You live through the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, abolishing slavery, defining citizenship, protecting voting rights. It's dizzying progress on paper, but slower in the streets. You attend meetings where people argue about how to enforce them. You hear a preacher say, "The law is only as strong as the man holding the whip or the pen." Then comes the election of 1876, one of the most contested in history. You don't know who the president will be for months. Finally, a compromise is struck. Rutherford B. Hayes takes office, but federal troops withdraw from the South. Reconstruction ends, and just like that, much of the progress is quietly rolled back. Jim Crow begins creeping in, like ivy on a broken wall. You don't give up, though. You keep moving. You help lay railroad ties through the Midwest. You ride a steam train across the plains, watching bison run in the distance. So many of them, it feels like the ground is alive. But then they're gone, hunted nearly to extinction in just a few decades. You never forget the sound of their hooves fading into silence. You see towns bloom along the rails. Dodge City, Abilene, Cheyenne. The West is wild, yes, but also weird. You hear tall tales about six-shooters and outlaws, but also about traveling dentists, underground cities made of salt, and saloons with indoor waterfalls. A quirky scene sticks with you. In Tombstone, Arizona, two rival theater troupes perform Shakespeare across the street from each other. One throws eggs, the other hires a brass band to drown out the soliloquies. Culture in the Old West is less dusty than you'd imagined. You meet Buffalo Soldiers, black cavalry regiments formed after the war. They fight bravely on the frontier, even as their country debates their very right to wear the uniform. Their discipline is unmatched. Their dignity, unshakable. But the West isn't empty. It never was. You walk through Lakota lands, Cheyenne lands, Navajo lands. You hear songs older than English, see dances that call storms, listen to stories etched into canyon walls. Then you hear about broken treaties, forced marches, boarding schools where children are stripped of their language and names. The term manifest destiny is being used now, as if destiny excuses everything. You're there when the Transcontinental Railroad is finished in 1869. Two locomotives meet at Promontory Summit, Utah. A golden spike is driven in with fanfare. Photographers capture it all. But no one photographs the Chinese laborers who did most of the work and weren't invited to the ceremony. You remember that. It sticks. Still, the country pulses with invention. You hold a telegraph key and send your first message. Dots and dashes across miles. You marvel at how silence can now carry voices. You begin to hear a new name whispered through crowded streets and muddy mining towns. Mark Twain, a steamboat pilot turned storyteller. You read The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by oil lamp and laugh, surprised at how much truth hides inside mischief. Then comes steel. Skyscrapers in New York. The Brooklyn Bridge stretches across the water like a steel spider web. You walk across it one misty morning, holding your hat against the wind, feeling the cables hum beneath your boots. You're not sure what kind of country you're living in anymore. Is it healing, expanding, or just learning new ways to forget what it doesn't want to face? One night, you overhear someone say, "We're done with war. Now we build." But you notice the way they say it, like a wish more than a promise. You can't help but wonder, build what? And for whom? You wake up to the smell of coal smoke and the clang of metal. The air tastes different now. Grittier, electric. This is the age of industry, and you can feel the hum of machines even in your bones. Cities rise like iron mushrooms. Streets bustle. Smoke stacks scratch the sky. You walk through New York, past workers flooding into textile mills and tenements packed tighter than books on a shelf. Men hammer steel high above the city, balanced on beams with nothing but wind and luck between them and the street. You tilt your head back and think, so this is what progress looks like. You ride your first elevator, an iron cage pulled by ropes, and hear the word skyscraper, spoken as if it were science fiction. The buildings grow taller every year, each one a monument to ambition and elbow grease. Factories run day and night now. The clock rules everything. You punch in, work until your fingers ache, punch out, and go home just long enough to sleep and start again. Children work too. Some barefoot in hot mills, others hauling coal through tunnels where the sun never comes. You don't like it, but it's common. Accept it. For now. One day, you hear about a man named Andrew Carnegie. Once a poor immigrant, now richer than some countries. He builds steel empires and writes essays about giving money away. You see his name on libraries and wonder how many bricks it took to balance out his fortune. Then there's Rockefeller and his oil, Vanderbilt and his trains, Morgan and his banks. They're called robber barons or captains of industry, depending on who's talking and whether they're paid to say it. You see labor fights breaking out, strikes, riots. In Chicago, the Haymarket affair turns deadly when a bomb explodes during a protest. You weren't there, but you hear about the chaos, the panic, the executions that follow. Historians still debate who threw the bomb. Maybe no one will ever know. You join a union. Maybe it's the Knights of Labor. Maybe it's a local carpenter's lodge that meets behind the grocer's. You hold a sign once, your hands shaking. You're not used to shouting, but the anger helps. Still, you marvel at the marvels. Electric lights replace gas lamps. You visit an exposition and see a whole building lit up with bulbs that don't flicker. The world seems to glow in a way it never has before. And somewhere on the horizon, a man named Edison is battling another named Tesla about how electricity should flow, AC or DC. You don't understand the science, but you understand the drama. Tesla has pigeons and dreams. Edison has patents and factories. The war of currents begins. You take your first telephone call, astonished to hear your cousin's voice echo from a black box. You read your first newspaper with a photograph in it, not just an engraving. The man's face, wrinkled and alive, stares back at you through time. Meanwhile, new arrivals flood the ports. You visit Ellis Island and see families clutching satchels, children blinking in awe, names shortened or misspelled forever. They come from Italy, Ireland, Poland, Russia, China. You help a young man from Bavaria find his uncle in Chicago. You give a blanket to a baby named Sophia, whose mother is too tired to speak. You learn that in some cities, more than half the population is foreign-born. You hear dozens of languages on a single trolley ride. The melting pot simmers, sometimes sweet, sometimes bitter. A quirky fact sticks in your mind. In 1890, the U.S. Census declares the frontier officially closed. There's no more line between civilized and wild. You think about all the covered wagons, the battles, the treaties broken, and wonder what happens to a country once it runs out of wilderness. And then you hear about a ship called the Maine, anchored in Havana Harbor. It explodes. The newspapers scream, "Remember the Maine." You're not sure what happened, but the headlines are large enough to shout down doubt. Soon, war drums beat again, this time against Spain. The Spanish-American War is short and loud. You read about Teddy Roosevelt charging up San Juan Hill with the Rough Riders, cowboys, Ivy Leaguers, and adventurers all mixed together. When it ends, America has new territories: Puerto Rico, Guam, the Philippines. You hear the word empire whispered with pride by some, shame by others. You start to feel something shift. This country, once a collection of rebellious colonies, now acts like a rising giant. You see the flag raised over faraway lands. You're not sure whether to cheer or worry, but the factories keep running. The cities keep growing. And somewhere, in a workshop or a barn or a silent midnight corner, a pair of brothers are trying to teach a bicycle with wings how to fly. The century is about to change, and with it, everything. You step into the 20th century with dust on your boots and wonder in your eyes. It's 1901, and the world feels like it's charging forward on wheels, wires, and whimsy. You hear about the Wright brothers in North Carolina, how they coaxed a fragile machine into the air for 12 breathless seconds. You picture it like a bird stitched from bicycle parts and stubbornness. You laugh softly, because no one believes it'll ever be useful. But that's how it always starts. You ride a streetcar in a city so busy, it never seems to sleep. Automobiles putter past, noisy, smelly, magnificent. You see Henry Ford's name in the papers. He talks about mass production, about making a car the average man can afford. The Model T rolls off the line in 1908, black and boxy. And suddenly roads matter in a way they never did before. You move into a tenement in New York City for a while, just to see. You meet a family from Sicily on one side, from Minsk on the other. The air smells of stew and kerosene. A baby cries. A phonograph plays something slow and crackly. You sleep beside strangers and wake up to the same dream, a better life. The progressive era is in full swing. Reformers rise. You attend a rally where Jane Addams speaks about settlement houses and dignity. You hear Upton Sinclair's The Jungle read aloud in a cafe, and you never look at sausage the same way again. Laws change. Food gets inspected. Children go to school instead of coal mines. A quirky moment. In 1904, a man builds a giant, full-scale model of an ideal city at the World's Fair in St. Louis. Everything's white, symmetrical, ordered. It's beautiful and deeply temporary. They tear it down afterward. You wonder if that's a metaphor. Then, 1914, you hear a name? Archduke Franz Ferdinand. You don't know him, neither does anyone around you. But when he's assassinated in Sarajevo, the world begins to unravel. War breaks out in Europe. Massive, mechanized, merciless. America watches it first. You go to work. You read the headlines. You hear Woodrow Wilson say, "We must remain neutral in thought as well as deed." You nod. For a while. But then German submarines start sinking passenger ships. A telegram surfaces. Something about Germany asking Mexico to attack the U.S. You feel the mood shift. Flags appear. Drums roll. In 1917, America enters World War I. You enlist. Or maybe your brother does. You help sew uniforms, pack crates, grow victory gardens. You buy Liberty bonds and recite slogans like prayers. Over There becomes a national anthem of sorts. The doughboys ship off in khaki, faces still round with youth. You fight in trenches if you go. You learn the taste of mud, the sound of artillery, the stench of poison gas. You see soldiers wear makeshift masks soaked in urine to survive chlorine clouds. Historians still argue about whether the war was inevitable or just an accident of alliances, egos, and empires. Back home, women take factory jobs, drive trucks, run banks. The suffrage movement surges forward. You see marches, speeches, arrests. In 1920, the 19th Amendment passes. Women vote. The nation exhales, briefly and not equally. But the doors are open now. The war ends in 1918. You dance in the streets. Strangers kiss. Fireworks fill the sky. But just as the confetti falls, the flu arrives. The Spanish flu, they call it. Though it didn't start in Spain, it sweeps the globe. You wear a mask again, this time not for dust or soot, but for death. Streets empty, schools close. You read obituaries longer than classifieds. Some days, you're afraid to cough. It fades, eventually. But it changes you. And then, the Roaring Twenties. You walk into a jazz club, and it's like someone turned the world from sepia to color. Trumpets blare, skirts twirl, flappers laugh in defiance of everything proper. You sip something illegal. Prohibition is in full swing, but rules bend under the right password. Speakeasies bloom in basements. Gangsters become household names: Capone, Luciano, Moran. Bootleggers drive faster than cops, and money seems to grow on vines. The stock market climbs. Skyscrapers grow like weeds. You hear about Charles Lindbergh crossing the Atlantic in a single-engine plane. You read The Great Gatsby and feel the golden shimmer of dreams with cracks beneath the glitter. A curious memory. In 1927, the first talking movie is released. The Jazz Singer. People cry in the dark theater, not because of the story, but because the actor's voice floats through the screen like a ghost finally given a name. You think this decade might last forever, but it doesn't, because somewhere, between the champagne bubbles and the cigarette smoke, numbers are beginning to fall, and you're standing on the edge of a crash you can't yet see. It starts with a whisper, just a few nervous voices on Wall Street, a few stocks dipping too fast, a couple of businessmen sweating through their collars. You don't worry at first. No one does. The market always goes up, right? Then comes Black Tuesday, October 29th, 29. You stand outside the New York Stock Exchange and watch people pour out like smoke. Newspapers flutter in the wind, headlines screaming losses that barely feel real. You hear stories of fortunes erased in hours, bankers leaning out of windows, families rushing to pull their savings before it's too late. But it is too late. The Great Depression begins, not with a bang, but with a quiet dread that spreads like frost. You lose your job, or maybe you keep it, but your hours vanish like a magician's trick. Prices drop, but so do wages. You line up for bread in the morning, hat pulled low, dignity tucked deeper still. You trade soup recipes with neighbors. You learn to stretch flour with hope. In Oklahoma, the earth itself turns cruel. The Dust Bowl. You pass farms once rich with wheat, now just cracked soil and swirling clouds of brown. People tie wet cloths over their faces. Children cough through the night, and black blizzards roll in like punishment from the sky. You hear about families packing everything onto jalopies and driving west. California or bust. Steinbeck writes about them, and you read The Grapes of Wrath by candlelight. The pages stained with dust you swear comes from your own windowsill. You try to escape the weight with radio. You turn the dial to voices that crackle comfort. FDR's fireside chats, Bing Crosby's croon, the thrilling squeak of the shadow. You hear about Superman, faster than a speeding bullet, and wonder if hope wears a cape now. Then comes Roosevelt, 1932. Franklin Delano Roosevelt is elected president, and with him comes a phrase that buzzes in every ear. New Deal. You're not entirely sure what it means at first, but soon you see it. Men with shovels building roads and parks, artists painting murals in post offices, writers paid to collect folk tales. It feels like someone's trying. You join the Civilian Conservation Corps, maybe, or the Works Progress Administration. You plant trees, fix bridges, dig ditches that lead somewhere. The pay isn't much, but it's more than hope. It's motion. There's a quirky scene you remember. A government-funded theater troupe putting on a Shakespeare play in a barn, while cows moo in the background. The audience sits on hay bales. For a moment, the world feels almost normal. And then the banks. FDR shuts them down, just for a few days, to stop the panic. People protest at first, but when they reopen, steadier, quieter, you think, maybe this man with the cigarette holder knows what he's doing. But the depression doesn't vanish. It lingers, lurks. You get used to patching clothes, mending shoes, making do. You find joy in small victories. A full cupboard, a paid electric bill, a night with music and laughter, even if the laughs feel thinner than they once did. Then, far across the ocean, shadows gather. You hear about a man in Germany, Hitler, shouting into microphones with terrifying passion. Mussolini in Italy too. In Japan, the military tightens its grip. Newspapers begin using the word fascism, and you're not sure what it means, but it feels like thunder. In 1936, you watch the Berlin Olympics. Jesse Owens, an African-American runner, wins gold right in front of Hitler. 4 times. You cheer so loudly, you startle your cat. And then, 1939. Germany invades Poland. War again. You expect America to rush in, but it doesn't. Not yet. Isolationism is the word of the day. You agree with it. Or maybe you don't. Either way, you're tired. Everyone is. The scars of the last war haven't fully faded. Still, you read the headlines. Blitzkrieg. France falls. London burns under bombs. You donate old clothes. You argue with friends. You listen to Roosevelt speak of a world on the brink of abyss. Then, December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. You're eating breakfast when the news hits. Radio announcers speak fast, their voices clipped with disbelief. You picture smoke rising from ships, sailors diving into flaming oil, chaos wrapped in paradise. You feel the shift. You know, without needing to be told. Everything has changed. The next day, Congress declares war, and you, once again, become a soldier, or a nurse, or a welder, or a secretary, or a spy. Because this time, everyone fights. The whole country transforms overnight. One day you're patching your garden fence, the next you're collecting scrap metal for bombers. Factories stop making toasters and start making tanks. Car plants churn out jeeps. Typewriter companies now assemble rifles. The war machine roars, and you're a cog inside it. Sweaty, proud, humming songs you never thought you'd sing. You see the posters. Rosie the Riveter, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back. We can do it. You believe it. You are it. You meet women who used to be teachers, clerks, housewives, now drilling bolts into the wings of warplanes with steel in their hands and laughter in their eyes. Men flood into boot camps. You watch your brother get his first buzz cut and his last letter home before shipping off to Europe. You hold your breath. You promise to write. You always do. He always writes back, at least for now. You ration everything: sugar, rubber, meat. You save bacon grease for explosives. You plant a victory garden in your backyard, though nothing grows quite right except the tomatoes. You take pride in that. Red, defiant, sun-warmed tomatoes. On the radio, you listen to This is London, where Edward R. Murrow's voice crackles through the static, bringing news of blackouts, air raids, courage. Churchill's voice rises too, full of grit and thunder. We shall never surrender. You whisper it aloud. Just once. In the Pacific, you follow headlines. Midway, Iwo Jima, Guadalcanal. You see photos of Marines raising the flag atop Mount Suribachi. You keep that image in your wallet, folded beside your brother's picture. Back home, you hear whispers of internment camps for Japanese Americans, families forced from homes, held behind barbed wire for fear, not facts. You don't know what to think. Later, much later, you wonder why no one said more. In Europe, it's D-Day, June 6th, 1944. You imagine the beaches, the cliffs, the gray water streaked with smoke. You imagine being there, cold, soaked, terrified. A foot on foreign sand that might become your grave. Historians still marvel at the logistics, the audacity. You just marvel that anyone made it out alive. Then Paris is liberated. Then the Ardennes freeze in blood and snow. Then Germany crumbles, finally. You see the photos, the camps, the bones, the eyes of survivors. You feel your stomach drop in a way no victory can lift. VE Day, May 1945. You kiss strangers in the street, cry into someone's shoulder, dance without music, but it's not over yet. Because far away in the Pacific, the war still grinds on. Okinawa becomes a storm of steel. Japan does not yield. And then, August 6th, you hear about a bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The news is vague at first. Just a new weapon, they say. 3 days later, Nagasaki. You hear the word atomic for the first time, and you feel a chill, not from the wind, but from knowing the rules have changed. Forever. Japan surrenders. VJ Day. Victory at last. You go home. The world is different. You're different. Your brother returns, quieter than before. Or maybe he doesn't return at all, just a flag folded into a triangle. You carry both in your heart. America is triumphant, but weary. GIs flood the streets, marry fast, build homes even faster. Suburbs sprout like mushrooms. The GI Bill sends thousands to college. You go maybe. Or maybe you just work, save, dream. You read about a plan, Marshall's Plan, to rebuild Europe. A war hero, Dwight D. Eisenhower, becomes president. There's talk of highways, of space, of prosperity. But beneath it all, the ground still shifts. Because in 1949, the Soviet Union tests its own atomic bomb. And suddenly, the world isn't safe again. The Cold War begins not with gunfire, but with silence, suspicion, satellites and spies. You duck and cover under school desks. You build bomb shelters in your backyard. You listen to the news and wonder if one red button might end everything. And yet, you keep going, because peace is never perfect. And history, well, history is always waking up. You wake to static on the radio and the slow hum of optimism. It's the 1950s, and America wears a fresh coat of paint. Neon lights buzz over diners. Drive-in theaters flicker to life at dusk. Fridges hum. Television glows in living rooms like tiny hearths of modern magic. You live in a house with a lawn now. Maybe even a white picket fence. You know your neighbors' names. You barbecue on weekends. But beneath the cheerful commercials and polished cars, there's a quiet tension, like a smile stretched too wide, because the Cold War is everywhere. You watch newsreels of mushroom clouds and military parades in Red Square. Your government warns of communists in the schools, in Hollywood, even in your neighborhood. You hear about Senator Joseph McCarthy waving papers he says name spies, though no one sees the names clearly. The Red Scare spreads, fueled by fear and flickering black and white screens. You see careers ruined, lives upended, not by trial, but by rumor. Some fight back, most stay silent. Years later, historians will debate how much was real, how much was hysteria. At the time, you just know when to keep your head down. Meanwhile, a war brews on the Korean Peninsula. You read about the 38th parallel, about North versus South, about American troops once again crossing oceans to fight under distant skies. It's called a police action, not a war. But when you get letters from friends describing frozen foxholes and waves of enemy troops, it sure feels like war. The fighting ends in 1953 with an armistice, not peace. Korea remains divided. The wounds stay open. Back home, a different battle begins. The civil rights movement. You hear about a woman named Rosa Parks who refuses to give up her seat. About a preacher, young, calm, powerful, named Martin Luther King Jr., who speaks of dreams and mountaintops. You march once, quietly, heart pounding. You see signs that say, whites only, and feel your stomach turn. The Supreme Court rules that segregation in schools is unconstitutional. Brown versus Board of Education. In Little Rock, Arkansas, 9 black students are escorted to class by soldiers. You watch it on the news. You see their faces, their fear, their bravery, quirky detail. In the midst of all this, the first McDonald's franchise opens. Burgers for 15 cents. You eat one and wonder if fast food could really change the world. It does, in ways no one fully understands yet. Meanwhile, the space race begins. In 1957, the Soviet Union launches Sputnik, a shiny metal ball that beeps its way across the stars. You stand in your backyard, neck craned, searching the sky for the glint of fear. Children start studying more math. Engineers lose sleep. America panics just a little, and then gets to work. NASA is born. Rockets rise, astronauts train. You meet someone who worked on a capsule design and carries a bolt from an early test in their coat pocket like a lucky charm. The economy booms. Highways stretch like veins across the country. You take a road trip, maybe. Route 66. You see diners with jukeboxes, gas stations shaped like teapots, motels with neon signs promising color TV and magic fingers beds. But even as you drive freely, not everyone can. The Freedom Riders roll into the South. Black and white activists challenging segregation in buses. They're met with violence. You see flames on the evening news and realize that progress always arrives wearing bandages. You tune into a new kind of music. Elvis swiveling hips on Ed Sullivan, Chuck Berry bending strings, Little Richard howling into microphones. The beat is different now, louder, bolder, full of promise and unrest. In 1960, a young, handsome senator from Massachusetts becomes president, John F. Kennedy. His speeches are crisp, his charm magnetic. He promises a new frontier, and you want to believe him. You watch the first televised presidential debate, Nixon sweaty, Kennedy poised, and realize that image has become part of politics now, but hope is fragile. In 1963, Kennedy is shot in Dallas. You hear it on the radio. You see Walter Cronkite remove his glasses. You cry, not because you agreed with everything Kennedy said, but because you needed to believe someone could say it. The torch passes. Lyndon B. Johnson signs the Civil Rights Act. You hear King speak from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. I have a dream. The words echo, louder than any anthem, and somewhere, far away, in a jungle that doesn't make sense on any map you've ever known. The next war waits. The names begin to sound strange. Pleiku, Khe-san, Da Nang. You look them up on the globe and squint at a country shaped like a dragon's spine, Vietnam. You hear about advisors first, then troops, then bombings. Always more, never enough. The Vietnam War isn't declared in the traditional sense, but it grows anyway. Thick as jungle. You watch young men drafted, some eager, others terrified. You see them off with awkward hugs and new boots. Some never come back. Some return changed in ways no parade can soothe. Television brings the war home. Every night, you watch it in grainy footage. Helicopters swirling like insects, rice paddies turned into craters, soldiers wading through mud and uncertainty. There's no clear enemy, no clear front line. Just fear and fire and a tally of bodies that climbs every week. You hear new words, Agent Orange, napalm, Tet Offensive, My Lai. The images get harder to watch, harder to explain. You go to a protest for the first time. Maybe in a city park, maybe on a college campus. You hold a sign, You chant words you're still trying to understand fully. You see police in helmets, feel the heat of the crowd, and wonder when peace became a crime. Meanwhile, America transforms again. Woodstock, tie-dye, psychedelic rock. You hear Jimi Hendrix play the national anthem, and it sounds like lightning through a cathedral. You see flower children handing out free hugs and draft cards burning like leaves in autumn. Civil rights keep pushing forward, harder now. Malcolm X speaks of justice with fire in his eyes. Martin Luther King Jr. speaks of love and is murdered for it. You feel something break inside when you hear the news. Then Robert Kennedy, too. Gunned down in a hotel kitchen after winning the California primary. So much promise snuffed out in silence. You read To Kill a Mockingbird and Slaughterhouse-Five. And both feel like maps of your own confusion. Truth and war, justice. None of it is tidy anymore. Maybe it never was. A quirky, forgotten detail. In 1967, the first Super Bowl is played. Green Bay wins. No one really knows if it'll catch on. You smile, thinking how wrong they were. In 1969, a man steps onto the moon. You watch it live, heart racing, fingers gripping your knees. Neil Armstrong's voice crackles. That's one small step for man. You don't need the rest. The moment is enough. The camera shows a man in white against the blackness of space, and the Earth, your Earth, rising in the sky behind him like a blue marble. For a moment, everything feels possible. But down here, things are still spinning. In 1973, U.S. forces withdraw from Vietnam. You see helicopters lifting off rooftops, people clinging to skids. Saigon falls 2 years later. The war ends not with victory, but evacuation. Veterans return to a country unsure how to greet them. You stand at a bus station once, watching a soldier get off. No band, no brass, just silence. You nod at him. He nods back. That's all. In Washington, Richard Nixon faces scandal, Watergate, tapes, cover-ups, the first president to resign. You remember watching the speech, the wave, the helicopter lifting off the South Lawn. You feel oddly hollow, even if you weren't a supporter. The nation limps into the 1970s with its shirt untucked and its faith shaken. Gas lines stretch for blocks. Inflation rises. You buy less meat. You reuse coffee filters. You hum along to disco and wonder if joy is allowed when the world feels this uncertain. You also watch history twist in new directions. Title IX opens doors for women in sports and education. The environmental movement begins to bloom. Earth Day is born, and suddenly people care about rivers and smog and owls again. You plant a tree in your yard. It still stands. In 1979, American hostages are taken in Iran. You light a candle in the window, hoping it reaches them somehow. The news is grim. Then comes a failed rescue mission. Then long months of waiting. You learn what it means to feel powerless. But history doesn't sleep. The Cold War is still humming. Tensions rise, fall, then rise again. You watch Ronald Reagan take office in 1981, full of promises and cowboy metaphors. Morning in America, he says. You wonder if the sun really is rising, or just angled differently. And then walls begin to crack. Not literal ones, yet. But something shifts. Whispers of revolution start drifting from the east. And you, older now, watch carefully. Because when walls fall, they do it all at once. You wake one November morning in 1989 to something you thought you'd never hear. The Berlin Wall is coming down. On the news, you see young people with hammers, chisels, bare hands, chipping away at concrete and history at the same time. Families embrace across barbed wire. Soldiers do not shoot. You cry, though you don't know anyone in Berlin. You cry because freedom, when it arrives quietly, still makes a sound. The Cold War isn't over in an instant, but you feel it. The temperature lowering. Eastern Europe loosens its grip. The Soviet Union begins to dissolve like ice under sunlight. In 1991, it's official. The red flag with the hammer and sickle is lowered for the last time. The United States, for a moment, stands alone on the mountaintop. But you know better than to expect peace to be simple. Domestically, change continues. In 1991, Anita Hill testifies before the Senate about workplace harassment. And millions of women watch in silence, thinking, I've been there. Something opens. Something raw. It doesn't close again. Technology, meanwhile, explodes. You buy your first personal computer. Slow, beige, miraculous. You wait for dial-up to connect and feel like you've tapped into magic. Emails replace letters. Chat rooms replace phone calls. The world gets smaller and faster, pixel by pixel. In 1992, Los Angeles erupts after the Rodney King verdict. You see the fires, the fury. You feel the fracture lines again, different this time, but familiar in their sting. You hear the same old arguments. You watch footage shot by bystanders, and you realize truth can be recorded now in grainy video for all to see. You blink, and it's 1995. A company named Amazon starts selling books from a garage. You don't think much of it. Why would anyone buy books online? Then a college student builds a website to rate girls on campus. Years later, it becomes Facebook. You shake your head. Social networks sound like something out of a science fiction novel, and they kind of are. In 2000, the presidential election ends not with a decision, but a delay. Hanging chads, legal battles, Supreme Court rulings. George W. Bush becomes president. It's controversial. It's divisive. But eventually, America exhales and moves forward. Until the morning of September 11, 2001. Gain 1. You remember exactly where you are. Everyone does. You watch as two planes slice into the Twin Towers, as fire turns glass and steel into ash and grief. You see people run, leap, vanish. You hold your breath when the towers fall, and you do not exhale for days. The Pentagon burns. A field in Pennsylvania becomes sacred ground. The world tilts. You hear the words, War on Terror. You see flags on every porch. You hear names like Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. You attend vigils, give blood, hold hands with strangers. Unity feels possible for a while. Then war returns. Afghanistan, Iraq. You hear weapons of mass destruction and wonder if you'll ever see any. You don't. The wars stretch on. Soldiers deploy again and again. You write care packages. You stop asking when it will end. At home, technology races forward. You buy a phone that fits in your pocket and somehow connects to everything. You check news while waiting for coffee. You talk to friends in other time zones without thinking twice. A quirky moment. In 2006, a baby-faced senator from Illinois speaks at a rally. You think he's inspiring, but doubt he'll go far. 2 years later, Barack Obama is elected president, the first black president. You remember Martin's dream and feel something shift. Joy, pride, and backlash too. You weather a recession in 2008. You lose your job maybe, or your house, or just the sense that tomorrow is guaranteed. Banks fail. Bailouts arrive. You learn words like too big to fail and wonder who decided that. You start seeing hashtags. Occupy Wall Street. Black Lives Matter. Me Too. The streets fill with voices again. Marches swell like waves. The country doesn't break, it stretches. Then a pandemic. In 2020, you stay home. The street's empty. The air clears. You learn the sound of silence again. You wear a mask. You learn to bake bread. You lose people. You Zoom funerals. You celebrate birthdays through screens. You cry for strangers, for nurses, for the world. And through it all, you endure. Because that's what history is. A tide, a breath, 1,000 moments of falling apart and coming together again. And as you sit here now, older, wiser, maybe still wondering what it all means, you realize something beautiful. You've lived through chapters that will one day be stories. You've carried the weight of centuries in your hands, and tomorrow will write its own. The calendar turns again. You blink, and it's the 2020s. You look around and realize the world has become a collage of glowing rectangles and scrolling headlines. You carry a computer in your pocket that can answer almost any question. But somehow, you feel more uncertain than ever. The pandemic slowly recedes, at least from the headlines. Life returns, sort of. Offices reopen, schools buzz again. But something's changed. People speak more softly now, laugh more cautiously, ask bigger questions about how they want to live, what work really means, and who they are when everything else is stripped away. You walk downtown one day and realize how much has shifted. Stores you loved are gone. New ones bloom. A coffee shop where you used to meet friends is now a co-working space with touchless payment and contactless menus. The world is still familiar, but not the same. Politics feels louder, sharper. You watch elections unfold like sporting events, filled with tension, hope, fear, and disbelief. You scroll through reactions faster than your mind can keep up. Words like misinformation, deepfake, and cancel culture become part of daily speech. You hear that facts are debated and truth feels optional. You wonder how a nation built on free speech can also be split by it. And yet, there's beauty in the mess. You watch a new generation take to the streets again, marching for justice, equality, climate, and compassion. Their voices are urgent, their signs hand-painted, their phones always filming. You see them voting, creating, inventing. You smile because you recognize the pattern. The dream keeps passing hands, and every era reshapes it. You also witness the other side. Division, disinformation, and distrust. A storming of the capital. A global reckoning over race. Economic whiplash. Crises layered atop each other like a fault line under pressure. But you've been here before. Not this exact place, but close. And history, like breath, always comes back around. You visit a museum filled with artifacts from your youth. Floppy disks, cassette tapes, faded Polaroids. Things you once used without thinking are now displayed behind glass. You feel like both the visitor and the exhibit. A quirky note. You watch billionaires launch themselves into space in private rockets, and you think, is this ambition, absurdity, or both? Maybe history will decide. You watch the planet warm. Storms come stronger, fires burn longer. But you also see innovation. Solar panels gleaming on rooftops, wind turbines spinning along ridgelines, entire cities reimagining how they breathe. You see people returning to books, to gardening, to quiet walks without headphones. You realize that for all our noise, we crave stillness. And through it all, America hums forward, not in a straight line, never in a straight line. You think of the contradictions. A nation built on freedom, but born with chains. A land that expands and contracts, forgets and remembers. A place that houses both Silicon Valley and ancient petroglyphs, that mourns and celebrates at once. You think of the people, millions of lives stitched together across centuries. Immigrants, inventors, farmers, fighters, mothers, poets, protesters. People who got it right. People who got it wrong. And people who tried. You think of the Constitution, not perfect, but alive, amended, argued over, tested by time. You think of those three opening words. We, the people. You whisper them once, just to hear how they sound in your own voice. And finally, you exhale. Because this isn't just a history. It's a lullaby of endurance, of dreaming, of beginning again, again, and again. Now let's drift softly. Through forests once walked by tribes whose names still echo in rivers. Past candlelit taverns where revolution stirred over warm ale. Over fields that held freedom and fire, growth and grief. Through city streets alive with noise, protest, laughter, and neon. Beyond launch pads and cornfields, war zones and fairgrounds. Into the ever-breathing now, where you sit. Quiet, curious, and surrounded by the long hum of everything that came before you. Word count 1101. Wind down. You lie still now, with the weight of history gently settled around your shoulders, not heavy, but warm, like a soft quilt stitched from centuries. The past doesn't whisper to haunt you, it sings. Low, steady, like lullabies from long ago. You picture it all one last time. The ships on stormy Atlantic waters, the flicker of gas lamps, the tapping of Morse code, the shout of suffragettes, the dust trails west, the rustle of ration books, the rhythm of protest chants echoing across marble steps. Each image drifts past like fireflies. You feel your breath slowing, as if the land itself is breathing with you. In, out, soft, steady. Time for now has no urgency. Let it fade. Let the past become a gentle hum, the kind that cradles dreams but asks nothing in return. You've journeyed through centuries, and the only thing left to do now is rest. Sleep well.